Hello everyone, and thank you for joining APQC's Student Process and Performance Management webinar, the discipline of business process management in the digital age. As a reminder, audio is available through your computer speakers or dial-in lines, and all attendee lines are muted. This is the Q&A tool located on the right of your screen. If any questions during the presentation, please submit them here and we will get to them at the end of the webinar. This webinar will be recorded and you'll receive a copy of the slides as well as the recording in a few days. I would now like to pass the presentation off to Holly Lycoglan, the Process and Performance Management Principal Research Lead here at APQC.
All right. Thank you, Maddie, and thank you all for joining us today. It is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Matthias Kirchmer. He is a thought leader and innovator in the field of business process management, or BPM as we all like to fondly call it, and digitalization. He successfully integrated business and technology initiatives and combined his broad business experience with his extensive academic research to deliver pioneering management approaches that have proven to be both sustainable and have immediate benefits. He's most recently founded BPMD, a company focused on enabling ongoing digital transformation and strategy execution through the discipline of BPM. Previously, Dr. Kirchmer was a managing director and global lead of BPM at Accenture and CEO of the Americas and Japan IDS Shear, known for its ERA software. Dr. Kirchmer has published 11 books and over 150 articles. He's affiliated faculty at the University of Pennsylvania and teaches regularly at several other universities. In 2004, he received a research and teaching fellowship from the Japan Society for Promotion of Science. So without further ado, I would like to hand this off to you, Dr. Kirchmer, so you can talk about the discipline of BPM in the digital age.
Yeah, thank you very much, Holly, and good afternoon, everybody. I thought to discuss here process management and how it changes in the digital age in 3 steps with you. That we start talking about the relation of process management and digitalization and how BPM adds a critical value to digitalization. We will then talk about how process management changes in the digital age, how it uses digitalization itself. And we will finish up our discussion taking a step back and looking at the people side of process management, and we'll see that it still stays very important and crucial for the overall BPM discipline. Having said that, well, if I look at today's world, digitalization is of course present everywhere. And about a year ago, I bought a new car, and with the car, as a normal add-on, I received an app that I installed on my smartphone, and now through the app I can here blow the horn of the car, I can get it started, I can send directions to my GPS. So I smiled and thought, oh, that's quite a nice little toy. And I have to admit, then after about 4 weeks of excitement, I didn't use that app anymore because, well, I didn't get any real value out of it. And that only changed a few months later when I had to get my car parked through a valet service at a hotel in the evening, and we arrived very late. And the next morning I came to the reception and they said, we have your key here, but we have a little problem. The garage was full, so we couldn't park your car in the garage. And the valet service from yesterday evening is not back yet, so we don't know where your car is. So I was just about to get a bit angry, but then I thought here of my new app and looked at it, and there's of course one functionality that you can locate your car, and I saw, oh, it's only a couple of blocks away. I walked towards that address, of course, using here my map application. And then when I was close enough, I hit the button to blow the horn, and very quickly I found the car. And suddenly that application got really useful, because suddenly it was not just the connection between myself and the car through the internet, but I made that connection part of a business process that really adds value. And that's exactly what digitalization is about. It's about connecting physical products with people using the Internet of Things, and using that to enable new innovative processes that add additional value to an organization. And in practice, that's a process part. So the thinking about how exactly you get value out of that technology, that is something still many organizations struggle with, and many organizations think about last. Another more business-related example, one company we worked with a few years ago, they noticed that they got a lot of complaints that their final assembly is too slow, and that this really slows down the whole delivery cycle. So they decided to launch a huge automation and digitalization project, and suddenly about a year later, that whole final assembly line was basically people-less, everywhere the little robots, the machines were connected with here the CID and CAM components, so really state of the art. However, when they measured the delivery cycle time, almost nothing changed. And to make it even worse, they suddenly noticed, about a third of the year we don't use that assembly line because it's a seasonal product, and that's a change in the final assembly is only required a few months per year. And another 3 months later, they came to the conclusion, that investment will never pay back. And they got really desperate, and we got them in. And what we found out was that the big delays in their final assembly was not that the assembly itself was too slow. It was created through big data issues up front. Here, outdated, incorrect bills of material, incorrect data in the material master. So topics that you would address and fix in a very different way. And that is a typical example when organizations just looked at the top part. How do I connect my machines, my physical products with my people, and to use the internet, without thinking about the end-to-end process and how it has to change and how it can be improved. And that issue may even become bigger now, with more and more companies looking into digitalization, because a Gartner study came out a year ago or so, came to the conclusion that only 1% of organizations have their processes enough under control that they can realize the full potential of digitalization. And if you compare that number with other numbers, like we have done research with over 200 companies around the world, that shows that about 75–80% are about to embark on a digital journey, or are in the middle of that. So if those organizations mainly don't have their processes under control, they may not get the full, or if at all, value out of that. And that's exactly now the point when process management becomes very crucial. When we asked in that study I mentioned companies, what are the key issues they struggle with in their digital journey, they came up with the points you see here on that slide. It has big resistance of change. It's difficult to figure out where to get started. Decisions are too slow, and. And all those points that you see here are typical topics of the discipline of business process management. Process management supports the change of the organization, its transformation. It helps to prioritize, figure out where to focus on and where to get started. It provides the transparency necessary to take here a difficult decision. It identifies where you have gaps of skills and competencies, and it helps you through this transparency to align your people, technology, and processes. So the discipline of process management becomes something like the value switch for digitalization, and modern definitions of BPM recognize that and define process management as the management discipline that moves strategy into people and technology-based execution, and does that fast and at minimal risk. So process management becomes a key execution strategy without which digitalization cannot really exist. And if you wonder what is behind that discipline, that is also an area where we've done a lot of research, over 300 initiatives and organizations, and we identified what are the key capabilities that successful organizations have built, and you see that in the background of this picture. We call it the process of process management that brings the BPM discipline to life. And all those capabilities are basically about three topics. They are about figuring out what to focus on and how to prioritize. And that's important to know that there exists very solid research, academic as well as practice, that an organization only competes with about 15 to 20% of their processes. 50 to 20%. That means 80% are commodity processes that you need, and you need to execute them at an industry average, but detailed optimization and innovation in those 80+% of your processes does not really lead to value. So BPM has to help to figure out where are the 10–15% to focus on. Then it's about, of course, improving those processes and improving them in the specific context. All processes have different characteristics, and you will need different ways of addressing them. And we'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. And once you have improved your processes, of course, we need to sustain those improvements, keep the processes on track. And that's another key part of process management. And organizations up to now focused very much on that improved part. With digitalization becoming more and more important and driving investments, BPM has to catch up partly in the other areas and really help to figure out where to get started, and then keep those new digital processes on track and really benefit from that agility and innovation that they can bring to the table. And that leads us to the second big topic. How does process management have to change to achieve that? And how does digitalization enable a new process management? So how does BPM apply those new capabilities to itself? And we use there our process framework that we just discussed briefly as a baseline. And of course, process and process management have traditionally attracted new technologies, new integration technologies, and many parts of this process management are well covered, like the project execution with sophisticated project management systems, and the execution of the resulting process through process automation tools. Most of the organization nowadays use something like process repositories or enterprise architecture tool to capture and manage the information about the company. There are lots of here automation and digital based improvement and execution approaches around. Even some first areas of people engagement are covered through here on-learn management systems or online communities. But there are also still areas that are less covered through this digitalization, and the ones that are covered are often not sufficiently integrated. So to have a more systematic approach to use digitalization for the process of process management itself will be a huge topic in the years to come. And areas where we see a lot of need and already lots of things happening are the ones that you can see here in red. It's around the process strategies of figuring out where the high impact, low maturity areas are and how to touch them. That is something you may say, okay, why should we automate that? We do that once and then we are set. But the issue here is that you do that in the context of a specific strategy, and since our business environment is very much changing and changing all the time, you need to adjust the strategy, and with that you need to adjust priorities and focus behind it. If you don't have that handled through appropriate methods and tools, you run into issues. The whole topic around value realization, once a project, an implementation or a transformation initiative is finished, so in most of the cases you have not achieved all your goals. The stock levels have not suddenly dropped. That is something you need to manage. And this value realization, the related controls are also in many organizations not sufficiently supported. And we see in the whole field around governance, process and data governance, that there's a lot of opportunities to support that in a more consistent and holistic way through digital tools. Same for the people enablement. As I mentioned before, there are components in it, but a real consistent community management, leveraging all the opportunities we have is currently very difficult to get. However, there's also already quite a lot happening and a lot possible, and I'd like to give you a bit an idea about that. Like there's first tools out there to support that whole prioritization and a focus approach. We see here examples that you create digitally a value driver tree that identifies what an organization needs to get right to deliver on its strategy. And then you link those value drivers to your different processes so that you identify the overall impact of a process. You compare it with the maturity level so that you see where your high impact, low maturity areas are that you focus on. You can see how those changes over time, if you change the weights of value drivers or the value drivers themselves, so that you have a dynamic way of targeting value in your organization. And this is something you can then right away operationalize by linking your projects and initiatives to those same priorities. And you see here an example of an overall operating model of an organization. You see the red areas as high impact areas of the organization, and you see in the little numbers behind it how many initiatives go on in which areas. And you can see here right away that there are quite a few initiatives in commodity areas, whereas not all high impact areas are covered. That means there is a need to adjust resources, to adjust initiatives so that you deliver in the best way possible to your organization. And to have a handle around that is a key point, a key basis for successful process management, to make sure that you improve and transform what matters most. I mentioned before that the improvement then also requires different approaches. 20, 30 years ago, it was enough to train here hundreds of black belts and thousands of green belts and apply here your Six Sigma or your Lean Six Sigma all over the organization. And I still think those skills and the way of thinking are very important. But it is as important to have a clear idea how you want to touch processes and where those more traditional methods make sense and where you apply newer approaches. And in a digital age, what has become very crucial is that you can conduct those improvements and transformations fast, that you get faster results. That means to include agile principles throughout the whole improvement, not only on the technology side, but also on the people and process side, has become very, very key. We currently work with a big insurance company on such an approach where we combine agile principle in all those dimensions to have a much faster and more reliable return on investment. So to have, like here, that rapid process improvement that launches actions from the beginning on has become very key. And to do that, it's no longer possible to work here with brown papers and post-its, but you need the right methods and tools, like the right repository and management tools, so that you get the transparency in, that you have the information around your processes in a reusable, easily reusable format, and can translate them where necessary into the required digital support of your processes. So rapid process improvement through agile principles, very, very key in our digital age. Then, of course, it's more and more important not just to look at operational excellence in general, but to have customer-facing and processes under control, and to move customer experience to the next level. And that's a typical topic where over many years very manual creativity methods were used with post-its and whiteboards. But we have nowadays great tools like we see here as an example available that help to create such a and describe such a customer journey, to include what our customers feel, what they think, what they say, and of course what they do, get a real idea about that, use that information for customer and market-driven innovation, but then also integrate that to the back office operational processes behind it. Because if you forget that integration, also in a digital world, that will lead just to a situation that everybody will see how bad your operations in the background are. So the need for an integrated customer journey planning, very, very important, and the appropriate here process modeling designs tools nowadays support that. Of course, we have then lots of those new technologies coming up. Very widely discussed topic is things like robotic process automation, RPA, and that is a way of improving processes that is on one hand very powerful, and I'm really a big supporter of that, but on the other hand it also can create quite a few headaches. And a few weeks ago I talked with the head of the IT department, the CIO of a big financial organization, and she said, we had and still have huge trouble with our RPA. My predecessor decided 2 years ago to really heavily bank on that, and we went ahead and checked where we can use RPA, and rolled that out very aggressively over the entire organization. And after just a bit more than a year, we had over 1,000 bots live, and everybody was excited. But another half a year later, we had to recognize that we were in a real chaos. There were lots of processes that had changed much more often and much more quickly than predicted. So those bots didn't fill out the right fields. There were many more errors to correct that overcompensated benefits we got from other areas. Many bottlenecks were just shifted from one area to a downstream area in the process, and created much bigger issues there, so that the situation got so bad that this company decided to stop all their live bots and go look at the process in a more traditional way, examine where that automation makes sense, where you can achieve improvements through more organizational topics, and now relaunch a much more focused approach to RPA. And that is, again, an area where then BPM and the approaches I explained before can have a huge impact in the digital age. And once you have improved such a process, then, of course, it's key to keep that closely under control, and to make sure that you measure whether you really achieve the returns you planned on. And that control management can nowadays also be well supported through appropriate digital tools. There's on one hand, of course, the provision of information through monitoring and mining tools, very, very exciting topic. But then there's the whole control management around it, so that you convert the insights through those monitoring tools into real action. And in this area, the whole control management for value realization, there are also quite a few new tools and technologies out there, even integrated with underlying modeling environments that can then generate the appropriate control and control tasks. So very, very interesting developments. So that whole area around improvements of processes has become much more dynamic and much more specific to the different process and process management environments. And we talked now quite a bit about here the use of new technologies, and one could think, okay, maybe now people disappear from process and process management, but not at all. In contrary, they become more and more important. And process management needs to form something I like to call a value network across the organizational structure of a company. And it's important to really see that as an entire value network, because it's not just about the core roles of a process management organization. So I like to call core roles the roles of people who really make their livings through the application of BPM methods and tools, like taking care of a repository, taking care of the RPA environment, things like that. But that's a core. Those core roles are not sufficient. A BPM discipline only really works if you have extended roles all over the organization, ownerships, ship roles for your processes, supported by enabling roles like stewards, and of course the appropriate top management sponsorship. So to make the discipline of BPM work, and especially in our fast-changing digital age, you need to put in place both of those groups. And a new role that is emerging stronger and stronger is a role I like to call the chief process officer. So the person who really helps to align the organization around processes, to align business and technology, and to move the strategy into execution. And I mentioned that term about the CPO the first time about 18, 19 years ago, when I had just moved here to the US from Europe, and many people smiled about that and said, well, nowadays it's even an exception to find managers who are responsible for this whole BPM topic, but to have a top executive taking care of that, that seems to be unrealistic. But there was last year published some research from here, one of the US universities, based on LinkedIn, and they found out that there were already more than 900 people with the official title Chief Process Officer, and thousands of people with similar titles, but basically describing the same role, like here EVP of Process Excellence, or VP of Process Management. And even now, if you look at the job descriptions behind here, Chief Digital Officers, that is often discussed, then it's the classical process topics that are are required there. So this new emerging top management position that leads here that strategy execution in the digital age, very, very key. And I'm convinced that in a short term, either CIOs will move in this role, or COOs will move in that role, or they will have to be built from the bottom up in organizations. And a key role, a key task that that role has is to build this process governance organization across the company. And you see here the key points that a governance concept makes out. I don't want to go into detail there, but what is important is to not just think about the operational process that gets automated and all that, but then think about how it gets managed and how it gets governed. And a key topic there is how does the collaboration model look like? How does my process governance work with my data governance, my enterprise architecture, my compliance management? And this collaboration model is then supported by appropriate governance processes, and they keep this discipline of process management up and running and effective in an organization. And keeping that effective is really worth it. There are key benefits because if you have that up and running, you can really align what happens in your organization, the key initiatives with your strategy, so you can make every improvement initiative a building block towards the execution of the overall business strategy. You can make sure that the improvement results are really sustained and that processes stay on track. And last not least, really align the organization and the team members towards the market, towards the value that has to be created for the client, and with that become much more effective. And with that, we have basically covered the key points I wanted to discuss. We saw that process management has become the value switch for digitalization, that process management becomes more and more digital itself, using the opportunities of the digital age, but that nevertheless the people and value network stays important and needs to be an integrated component of the overall picture. I know that was a short time for a lot of topic. If you need to know more, feel free to check also our webpage. You can download quite a few of articles, white papers. Most of them are also on the APQC page. And I see we still have a bit of time for questions. And with that, I would hand back to Holly.
All right, Matthias, thank you very much for sharing that information with us. We do have a few questions that have come in. The first question that we have is, at the beginning of the presentation, the individual heard that you said about 1% of companies have control of their processes. What do you mean, or how do you define having control of your processes?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. What the study means by that is that you have enough process management capabilities in place so that you can quickly adjust your processes to the needs of the market or the needs of your stakeholders in general. Let me give you an example. I currently work with another big financial organization, and they went through very massive digital transformation, automated many of their processes, went live with the first ones, but then suddenly the question came up, okay, now we have all those agile technologies in place, but who decides now when we can change something? Because if we change something in one functional area, that may have downstream effects that we don't know, so it may create issues somewhere else. We don't really know what to do, and that is a typical sign that the process governance has not been thought through as part of this digital journey. And that means that a company didn't have enough of a handle around their processes to really fully benefit from this new agile technologies. So this 1% means that 99% of the organizations think about the technology side of that, but they are not prepared enough to adjust and keep their processes on track with that, and with that they cannot fully realize the potential of this digital journey.
Thank you very much. The next question we have is that you mentioned that there's only about 10 or 15% of processes that organizations really need to prioritize and pay attention to. Do you have a process or approach that organizations can use to help understand what are those right 10 to 15% of their processes?
That's another great question, and I would like to answer that in 2 steps. First, maybe I didn't make myself 100% clear when I say there's 10-15% of the processes to focus on and to prioritize. That does, of course, not mean that all the others you shouldn't care about. If in any of the commodity areas you are, for example, 5 times more expensive than your competition, then you may also run into issues. The thing is only you would touch those processes differently. A commodity process, you would look for a way of more or less copying what an industry average organization does in that field to make sure that we stay on the average. Whereas in the high impact areas, there you really try to get better. And we have developed a patent pending approach to identify those high impact processes based on the value drivers coming out of a strategy and linking them in a systematic way to processes to then identify the impact of processes and then select the ones with the highest impact. I explained it now a bit in a simplistic way. There is of course more details behind it, but in principle it's a systematic way of linking the value drivers coming out of the strategy to the processes of an organization.
Okay. All right. The next question also had to do with one of the earlier data points that you said that 23% of organizations integrate across or cross-functionally. How would you define that, and how did you guys measure that?
I'm not 100% sure to which data point that's referred, but in general, I define cross-functional integration in a way that's with every decision to change anything at a working process, you systematically check all the up and downstream impacts that this change has. And that is normally a combination of having the right transparency over your processes, using here the appropriate here modeling repository environment, and you combine that with the appropriate components of your process governance.
All right. The next question is, how would you approach a process and questions? Hold on, how would you approach a process and questions to be in mind when dealing with cross-functional teams in an organization for reducing delays or waste in the process? So I guess it's how do you kind of engage and what is the approach and questions you have to keep in mind when you're dealing with those end-to-end processes and you're looking for reducing cycle time or waste and things like that when there's multiple players in the process?
Yeah, another very interesting question. And again, I have to answer that in a couple of steps. First, I think it's very important to start with the segmentation of your processes, as I mentioned before, because you would touch your high impact processes differently than you would touch your commodity processes, and that also impacts the way people collaborate and work together. Let me give you here another example. Big chemical company wanted to standardize their processes and with that harmonize the underlying systems. But to do that, they defined here such cross-functional teams who got the task in workshops to come up with a new standardized process across 5 or 6 to be rolled out across 5 or 6 business units. So, and those workshops went on and on and on, and most of them had at the end not as a result a standard, but they had as a result a whole list of reasons why it's not possible to standardize, or only very little things could be standardized. But in principle, it said we can only do it as we do it today because we are so different. So, and they tried that for over a year, and when they saw that the whole initiative was so much delayed, they came to the conclusion, okay, we need to do something differently. And that was the point when we then went through that straightforward exercise, and in less than 6 weeks we had identified what are the high impacts and what are the, and in that case it was even 90-something% of commodity processes. And for the commodity processes, we changed the complete workshop approach. Instead of having people working out a solution, we used as an input a common industry solution based on the software product that was used in that specific environment. It said, okay, that's how other organizations work in that field, in that company. And task of the workshop is it not to come up with a new process, but is to define how we make that common standard, industry standard happen in our organization. And with that, we get all the effects we need. Exceptions had to go through a very, very strict approval process, and already that's a different approach. Was speeding up things tremendously, and for over 90% of the processes. The other 10%, there we really launched even more sophisticated analysis activities up front to get more transparency over the processes, to identify where they are similar and where they are much different. We identified here valid reasons for variance in these areas, and in those fields we then really were driving and encouraging creativity methods, innovative approaches to processes, or spent a lot of time and effort to get those right. And they are really used the input of the different functional units involved, but also well aware that this takes additional time and effort, and we could afford that because the other processes were handled in a much more efficient way. And I could now go even more in detail. You would even the high impact areas and still continue to segment in the ones that are very knowledge intense and with that very differentiating, and the other ones that are more transactional, and you again handle them differently. But in principle, it was always that you first segment and then you adjust the tasks of the improvement to the specific process segment, and that allows you to manage the collaboration of the involved people in a much more efficient and effective way.
Okay, so just to make sure I kind of caught all of that correctly, what you're talking about then is, first off, you need to segment your processes into whether they're commodity or they're high impact priority ones. At that point, then you kind of take them apart because they have different levels of standardization or variation and acceptance that can occur. For the most part, you try to keep the little variation at kind of those higher levels, so the process group and the process levels, but you start to see the variation then at that kind of activity and task level. And that's where it winds up being a little bit more acceptable when you're looking at digitalization. Is that correct?
That's a good summary.
Okay, perfect. I know that always winds up becoming one of those big questions then, especially when we're talking about automation and digitalization, which is how do you standardize and how do you make sure what has the right level of exceptions? So.
I can even go a step further. I always am a bit hesitant when people talk just about standardization. In most of the cases, it's, as you explained, more an harmonization of processes. That means you define a standard on a level 2 or level 3 of your processes, but you intentionally allow variations on lower levels, except, again, exception, in areas that are somehow compliance relevant or relevant for your internal structures, that you do them the same way, then you would, of course, not allow those variations. But to really harmonize and do that based on different levels of detail, that is a key topic, and that gets very much simplified if you have the right segments of processes that you can touch the same or a similar way.
Right. Okay. Thank you. We have another question. It kind of goes into a different part of the presentation, but it said, if you can't get a kind of a chief process officer, in your experience, where's the best place that the BPM team fits in to help support the organization?
Yeah, that's another interesting question. And in that study, or in one of the studies I referred to, we asked that's a question to about 96 companies who have such a BPM discipline established, and it was interesting to see that about a third of them reported somehow into the CIO office, a third into the COO, and another third into different top management areas like the chief strategy officer, even several examples reporting to the CFO. But it was very consistent that the ones who were successful, they all reported to the very top of the organization. And in which area is the best, that really depends on the specific company. You see, if you have what I call an enlightened CIO who sees that more and more of the technology goes out of the organizations with the cloud, and all those digital opportunities, but what stays in the organization is the technology, is the process, and you need to understand how the technology and its link to people impacts that process and can add value. So the enlightened CIO has a very natural path to move towards something I like to call a CPO. So that could be a good solution if you have such a person in place. If it's a more classical CIO as well, I will retire in 5 years, and till then I don't want to have many things changed, and that may not be the best place to put that in. And with the COO, the same thing. If there's a very traditional COO who just thinks about efficiencies, cost cutting, cycle time reductions, then it may not be a good place for a BPM discipline, because all the opportunities to launch and drive innovation and customer experience, they will not be supported enough, so you don't realize the full potential of this management discipline. Then it's better to put it somewhere else. But if I currently work with here biologics company, and they have a very, very visionary COO who really sees the big picture and sees here an opportunity for a digital transformation of the organization, and there it's a perfect home for this process management discipline. So this is a typical question that you would answer in the context of a specific organization.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. I believe that is the last question that we had time for today. Matthias, thank you very much for joining and sharing your insights and your experience with the audience. We always appreciate your time. And I'll hand this back over to Maddie to wrap up the webinar.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. And thank you very much to everybody in the audience for the very interesting question and for the interest in the webinar itself. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Holly, and thank you, Matthias, again for your presentation today. If anybody would like additional resources related to today's webinar topic, we have some available in our knowledge base, so be sure to check those out. And if you have additional questions, reach out to Holly Lyko-Gland, and she can help you get answers to those as well. And I want to remind everyone, you will receive a copy of the slides as well as the recording via email within a few days from today's webinar. And don't forget to connect with us on social media. We post upcoming events, webinars, new content, and more. Thank you, everyone, for joining today, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.